Hey, I think we're live.
We are live, Elana.
We're
Elana, how
live.
we doing?
Amazing. Okay, so for everybody joining us, I'm Elana Ostrega. I'm the VP Marketing at Clearco, and this is Tony Capetola, or Capetola, if you're an Italian, if you're Tony's old Italian teacher, and he's the VP of Marketing and Partnerships at Sales and Orders.
Hi, Elana. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm very happy to have you. Clearco is really happy to host you. So today we're going to be talking about, how to 10x your revenue on your marketing channels. And I think Tony has a lot to say about it, and we're going to have a great conversation. So first of all, before we even get started, can you tell us a little bit about what Sales and Orders does and how you actually help people 10x their revenue?
Yeah, sure, of course. So Sales and Orders, we are an e-commerce marketing technology. And essentially, we help e-commerce merchants effectively list, market, and advertise their products on core channels such as Google Shopping, Microsoft Bing, Facebook, Instagram. We recently added support for Snapchat and Pinterest catalogs. And really, we're an end-to-end solution. We're able to connect to a merchant store, build their product feeds, send them out to these channels, and then help them optimize and grow their revenue across these channels with ad management and other type of marketing tools.
And so who are the ideal customers that you work with? Obviously Clearco, we work with e-com businesses, and we focus on founders through, just who are just starting their journey all the way through to much more mature businesses. So Sales and Orders, who do you typically work with?
Yeah, so I mean, we're pure play e-commerce merchants, but really, to put it simply, we're an any shop, any size solution, really, from running the gamut of small mom and pop operations to the SMB to mid market and all the way up to the enterprise sector. If you're a merchant that can list and advertise your products on these channels, we can help you do that.
And so I think what we want to focus on today is I know, we're coming up to Black Friday. It's one of those seasons where everybody is sort of scrambling and trying to figure out what do I do? How do I sort of set myself apart from my competitors and drive traffic? And I know that's a big focus for our founders right now, and we're doing everything we can to support them through that. And so what do D2C brands really need to focus on right now to drive that traffic? And what channels are really becoming much more substantial, especially right now, given all of the trends that are happening across the board?
Yeah, of course. So, and you're right, especially ahead of the holiday season, even as we're kind of in the back to school season as well. There are core components to, the strategy that merchants need to focus on. We kind of split them up into separate parts. From the very beginning, merchants really need to focus very heavily on their product data and optimizing that data because, channels like Google, Microsoft, even Facebook, these are relevance engines, right? And they utilize product data to fuel the ad campaigns. So when you're optimizing things like your product titles, your descriptions, if let's say you're an apparel and accessories merchant, you're including core attributes such as size, color, and gender. These only make it more make it so that the relevance engine behind these channels is more effective. It's able to more readily connect your products to the consumers who are actively looking for these things, or maybe are contextually driven, such as like a Facebook and Instagram, where you're targeting based on more around demographics. From there, it's all about, again, like you said, choosing what platforms are the best fit for your strategy. Ultimately, channels like Google Shopping and Microsoft Bing as search channels are huge growth drivers for merchants right now. And most merchants will start on these platforms and also kind of mix in Facebook and Instagram as the big three. But you don't necessarily want to just, cordon yourself off to just these channels. There are emerging channels. There are new opportunities, Snapchat, Pinterest, TikTok. You never want to leave yourself closed off to new opportunities. If you look at Google on its own, right, and Google Shopping encompasses a number of different opportunities for merchants, including free product listings. So actually sending your products to Google, and then your product can appear on Google Search and on Google Shopping entirely for free. You're not paying for these product listings, and they're not an advertisement in any way. Then it comes down to shopping ads, where you're actually building campaigns and you're bidding on your products, or a cost per click model, for example, to drive very targeted traffic back to your store that's has a very high probability to convert. And then there's other solutions such as Buy on Google, which is a native checkout solution for merchants in the US and France. But it runs the gamut. So you really have to not just look at it as a channel perspective, but what each channel brings to the table for what you're doing. And in the end, it really comes down to optimizing towards what we like to focus on, at least, is profitability, right? And ultimately, you can drive all the traffic you want. You can have great products. You can have a great website. But if you're not focusing on your customers and driving strong customer success and customer service, and thinking about things like lifetime value and lifetime duration and customer loyalty, again, we're top of the funnel. We can help you drive all the traffic you want. It'll be all for naught if you can't convert the visitors and keep them coming back for more.
So let's talk about that a second, because like
Sure.
I've had a couple conversations even today. So before Tony and I became live, we were saying how we were putting out fires today. And we were sort of talking about all the different things that we have to go through in terms of, finding the issues, discovering them, and figuring out how to solve. And so LTV is a really good thing to tackle, because I think a lot of people sort of think about this initial acquisition of this customer, and like, I bring this customer in at the top of the funnel. They may not convert, or they may convert, right? In the case of conversion, it's like, you don't want a one-time buy. You want these people to come back. You want loyalty. You want people to return. You want that retention. And so that LTV number, that will take you really, really far, right? That initial customer acquisition, like, it doesn't really do anything if you're not thinking about the extension of what you're bringing into the ecosystem to really keep them evolved with your brand and with your store, right? Keep them coming back for more repeat purchases, increasing your average order size every time they come back, right? So, how can people really think about the LTV? Like, when you think about an e-com business and you think about, the initial purchase, like, I think about things like tools that people can use to keep people engaged, SMS, emails, keeping people involved in what's going on. So, what advice would you give to like the e-commerce founders watching today in terms of, all the different techniques they can use from email marketing all the way through to SMS to really keep those people evolving with their brand and with their store and with their products?
Yeah, of course. So, one of the things that as we were discussing, and some things that you and I are very familiar with, is something called cohorting, right? And why I want to dive into this is because a lot of merchants will just kind of do a blanket approach. And this is okay. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do, especially if you're just getting started out, or if you're really building upon an existing strategy. But what you really want to start to do is you want to start to cohort or group your different types of consumers into, let's call them buckets, let's say, right? And
Segments,
create
buckets,
segments,
yeah,
buckets, baskets, whatever it might be, right?
universes. Yeah, of
Universes,
course.
audiences. Audiences is the term we like to say,
It's an
right?
easy one.
But essentially, what you want to do is you want to build a unique strategy around each audience. What types of products are they purchasing? What types of products are they purchasing? Technical difficulties here. Sorry, folks. What types of products they're purchasing, what type of interactions they're doing on your website. Maybe that they leveraged a coupon code potentially, and that you want to extend that, or maybe use some kind of email drip campaign to reintroduce a new coupon code. And another thing that I think merchants really need to start thinking about is UGC, or user generated content, right? And actually leveraging your consumer audience or cohorts to be almost brand evangelists for yourself, right? And this can be things as delving into affiliate marketing, influencer marketing, all opportunities that you can actually engage with the consumers on and make them work for you or with you for your brand and your growth.
Yeah, 100%. I think like building a promoter of your brand is the best way to get another person involved in your brand, right? Like, who are you going to listen to? You're going to see an ad and you're going to think, I'm not sure if I'm going to convert. And then you speak to your brother or your sister or somebody else in your life, and they're like, oh my God, I just had the best experience with this brand, right? And building that evangelism with people and building those influencers and those promoters for your brand is actually the best way to do it. So I totally agree that the user generated content is actually extremely powerful, especially for companies that have, D2C products. It's super important. But one of the things that struck me about what you were just saying is, something related to attribution. And I think it's really important to understand what people interact with and start to build those cohorts and segments based on what they're actually interacting with. And so I think, younger brands, younger e-commerce brands who maybe have a sense of their audience, but they don't really understand how to cohort or how to segment. Like, what sort of things, like, I would think, building an attribution model is quite hard at this juncture when there are a lot of privacy things that are changing, right? Like, Facebook has changed a lot of things. The iOS 14 update has changed a lot of things. It's very difficult to understand some aspects of your business. But what kind of tips and tricks would you give people if they're really just trying to build this like very basic attribution of like, people saw this, they converted from here, people engaged with this, they converted from here? Like, how would you navigate that?
For me, it goes back just data, right? You need to be leveraging core tools like Google Analytics. You can even start using things like heat mapping tools, funnelization tools, even CRMs like the HubSpots of the world. These different platforms, right? They're geared towards doing these things and helping you do these things at scale, right? Because they're collecting first party data on your site. And it's a good point, as you mentioned, with iOS and everything, because along the lines of the privacy and security concerns that are more recently coming up in the ecosystem, it's the conversation is really kind of turned to first party data. What data are you collecting about your merchants, and how can you begin to leverage what they're doing? So you want to be able to find the right tools that'll work best for you to understand what that looks like. And like tools like Sales and Orders can do that to a certain degree, where we can help merchants expand into like remarketing, for example, because we can use data directly out of tools like Google Analytics to source out different experiences for merchants, right? And I guess there's a great segue into like why remarketing might be so important, because a lot of the data that's being collected on your site can tell you things like abandoned cart visitors, abandoned checkout visitors. And these are some of the key cohorts, again, audiences that you want to start thinking about, and then ironing out the detailed messaging that you want to build upon that. And the great thing is other tools like HubSpot as well, or other platforms, can help you build your email campaigns around this and segment and build unique workflows or sequences based on those specific cohorts. And in the end, data. Always go back and look, you can have the best plan in the world, the best laid plans of mice and men, right? But in the end, it's all going to come down to what data and analytics you can source from your efforts and how you can translate that into adaptation moving forward.
Agreed. I think personalization is actually huge. And I think people don't take advantage of these little, like the segmentation is evolved from understanding your customer and really understanding like what their next move is going to be. And you'll start to see that. You start to develop insights from these cohorts and from these companies. And I think the cohort analysis, especially when it comes to lifetime value and really understanding these groups, is so important. The other thing that you touched on, which is really interesting, is like these nurture campaigns, these kinds of email campaigns that you send people. Right. I think like the abandoned cart emails, getting people more engaged. I mean, how many times have you made a purchase? I was going to use Sephora as an example. That's probably a bad example for you. Maybe not.
Maybe I bought something for my wife. Sure.
Maybe you bought something, right? But how many times have you gone, it's like you forgot something, right? Those really help people convert. And I think people, they need to take advantage of those insights as much as possible to really understand like remarketing emails, remarketing ads, all of these different audiences, like hitting them in all these different ways is super important. But how much is too much, right? Like we were talking about a couple of different channels before, and we were saying, Google and Facebook and Instagram and Bing. And so in terms of diversifying all the different channels that people are going to use, like, do you think there's, that people often will dip their toes in too many channels and try to do too much with their marketing efforts?
I think to a certain degree that this can happen. It really depends. It depends on the stage at which your business is at, right? If you have, let's just say, the staff and the resources to support going beyond your core endeavors, right? I mean, to say it takes a village is an understatement. I will say this: merchants can, yes, can kind of overdo it or do too much. But the one thing I would say is merchants should never be fearful to try something new and to always refer back to the data and the analytics to determine if that was the right move for them. And that kind of goes into potentially, right, is looking at some of the troubleshooting issues that merchants run into, that maybe they decide to adopt a new channel or try a new type of campaign out, but they don't have the right tracking set up to be able to determine whether or not it was successful, right? So going back to that is just saying, ensure that you have the capability to know if that was the right decision or not is even more important than actually going out there and trying it and seeing what happens.
Right. And so would your advice be, especially during this time, like how do I sort of maintain repeat customers? How do I maintain my existing customer base versus going out and getting new ones? Like, is there, we all know that it's cheaper and easier to sort of go back to the existing customer base than it is to acquire new ones. And so during this time when it feels like, it's almost like a flood, a sensory overload of all these different ads and all these different things going on right now, like, would you urge people to focus on their existing customers versus new acquisition? How would you sort of derive that split between the retention efforts and the acquisition efforts?
Of course, I think it's two completely different segments, right? It's two completely different arenas that you should really treat very separately, right? Because if you don't have net new acquisition, then you can't keep continuing to build upon the lifetime value and the lifetime duration of your existing. Bringing more customers in means that you can continue to, work on customer loyalty and retention with a larger pool of merchants. And then what you gain from that is more data to determine how you can begin to optimize and or adapt to build upon those things. From the very beginning, though, I think it was most important. I think this just goes for e-commerce merchants, but marketing in general is you want to be able to connect with your merchants at a visceral level. I'm sorry, with your consumers at a visceral level. You want to be able to identify with them and deliver messaging and content that is uplifting, almost emotionally affecting them in an emotional way. And then you want to translate that into all the efforts after the fact. You've acquired them, your website's great, it resonates with their emotions, right? Maybe you have some type of tool that allows you to consumers to select a donation, right, or a charity to donate some of the proceeds to. And with something like that, you're engaging with them at a completely different level and at a very emotional level. And then you want to then continue to translate that into your customer retention strategy as well, right? And you can do that through cohorting, but you also want to be conscious of the fact that these people are people, and you want to find ways to connect with them all the way throughout the funnel and then after the fact.
Yeah, I think so. Really important for the audience to sort of stress this idea of like the fulsome customer experience, and I think that's super important, and it starts right from the top. And I think people forget about the emotional aspects. We keep talking about transactions and increasing average order size, and getting repeat customers, and it's so transactional. And I think while that's super important to get people to actually to complete the transaction, what is more important is the experience that they have from start to finish. And that emotional component that you mentioned is actually like extremely important. Like with all of our advertising efforts at Clearco, it's one of the things we think about the most is like, through the entire journey, these people are human. At the other end of that computer is somebody who's reading this and needs to feel this connection, right?
Yep.
And not having that connection and not feeling that what you're seeing is actually like rooted and organic to you, you feel that distance, and that distance is what's going to separate the sale today from not happening, right? Because
Yep.
you need to build that connection. And so I think that's super important, and I think that really speaks to just the fulsome efforts of building that funnel experience of like the ad all the way through to the experience that they have through checkout, all the way through to the experience that they have once they're actually maintained in your ecosystem, newsletters that they may receive, thought leadership that you might provide them, things like that. I actually think that's like super important to keep people engaged. And so going back to something you said earlier, because I want to touch on it a little bit. There's been some things that we've been talking about on the marketing team that we're sort of engaging with right now. We're engaging with Snap, we're engaging with TikTok, we're engaging with all of these new channels, influencer marketing. And so I actually think, TikTok is an amazing channel, and there's a lot of things that can be done there. So have you guys dabbled in TikTok really? And like, do you have any tips or advice for anybody who's sort of getting into these newer emerging channels?
So we don't currently help merchants with TikTok because it is something we're exploring very heavily. I know as somebody who enjoys TikTok for the videos themselves, right, and really engaging videos, but generally not in the spectrum of marketing. I love videos about gardening and cooking, right? I was a professional chef before I ever came into the digital marketing world. So
Oh,
yeah, uh, long story. We'll get into that some
another
other time.
a conversation for another
Hopefully,
time, Tony. But
yes,
like,
that's the next
I'm
part of the
game if
polls.
you want to cook dinner.
Absolutely, anytime.
Okay, awesome,
We'll do a little food channel thing going on
perfect.
here. Um, but getting back to that, um, TikTok's very interesting because what I always find is, and let's consider myself the consumer. I'm watching all these great TikToks, and I'm flipping through a TikTok, and then I land on a one that is essentially a product ad. And knowing that I'm not an online shopper, it's weird, right? I work on the other side of things, but I don't really shop online all too much. But the one thing I always wind up doing is I wind up stopping every time I see a product or a product ad driven TikTok, or a sponsored product, and I'm engaged. I'm like, this is something really cool. What I would say is that if merchants do want to test this, I would test this with like the 80-20 rule, right? Choosing your best products to serve on these platforms, to make sure that your pixels you're tracking are in place before you do all this, and then just to create very engaging content that's fun and unique and really like humorous, right? One of the best parts of channels like Snapchat and TikTok is the humor behind it, and I think that also kind of ties back to engaging with people on an emotional level, which only furthers your chances and the opportunities to then build UGC and customer loyalty around that, and maybe even getting them to start a consistent inflow of reviews for your products or your company, where you can begin to do things like Google product reviews or Google customer reviews. You can leverage platforms like Trustpilot to have a trust score on your website. I mean, there's just so many opportunities. So I would go in consciously thinking about always putting your best foot forward, having all of your content and all of your creative ready to go, and then at the very end just making sure that you're always making sure that you're connecting with the merchants. These platforms generally have some type of internal messaging or connections or likes. You want to know what that really means for your brand and your business and your products, and then on top of that, always having the ability to track back to the performance in the end.
So we actually got a really interesting question. And the question is there value spending time resources on TikTok when Instagram has a very similar reel function?
This is actually a really cool question. I like this question, and
It's a great
that's from
question.
Justin. Thank you so much for that question. So let's put it this way, right? TikTok and Instagram are totally different things. Even though TikTok and Instagram's Reel are similar to a certain degree, they are two completely different engines, right? One of the things is that with Facebook and Instagram, merchants have unique opportunities to reach their consumers in a contextual atmosphere, right? It's targeting that's generally based around demographics or interest or topics, even different pages or followers that you're targeting, your audience is generally looking at. Um, Most merchants are leveraging dynamic product ads, which utilize machine learning to target and reach the most valuable of consumers within that pool, right? And it's a totally different atmosphere altogether. TikTok is very much it's a you know what it is an early it is an it is an it's an emerging platform. It's very new. I wouldn't spend all too much time into it if you're not sure of yourself. But also at the same time, it won't matter unless you really, and if you do want to try, it won't matter if you don't have the right data or tracking in place to make sure that you can see whether or not it was profitable or worked for your business. Um, I think you need to treat them differently, and I think you need to come up with a unique plan around each one. I think you should try to test different things and explore different opportunities on each one. Just knowing that Facebook and Instagram as a whole, right, because this is essentially the same platform, has a larger pool of possible consumers. Like just the size of the community is so much larger. You definitely want to put most of your eggs towards that kind of basket. Um, but at the same time, TikTok is something that's emerging. It's new. It's a different audience, right? We're talking about what you might think is more of the younger audience. It just runs the gamut, right? So it's very hard to tell what it's going to look like. I'm excited to see it. And I'm excited to see how they emerge into the e-commerce space. I mean, you look at Facebook and Instagram; they introduce shops, so that you have things like native checkout and native checkout and native shopping directly on profiles, as opposed to going to a merchant store. So Facebook and Instagram certainly offer a lot more than TikTok does right now, but TikTok is also something that's new and emerging, and probably is going to be hitting a lot of millennial and Gen Z shoppers.
100%. I would agree. I would say don't throw all your eggs in that basket quite yet. I think
Right.
there's so much to learn. And I think that's exactly what people need to do with TikTok right now is really take advantage of it as a learning tool. I think
Yes.
it's a really good place to sort of A/B test, understand the audience there. But I think there's just not enough information. And I think like contextually, like you said, it's kind of all over the place. You have the mom reels, which is what I watch. And then you have, maybe some of the cooking stuff and then some like very random stuff that pops up on TikTok.
Very random.
Very, very random. And so I think, if I were to sort of give a, educated advice on where you should be potentially dropping more of your budget, that would definitely be more towards Facebook, Instagram rather than TikTok. Cause I just think
Yes.
the information you're going to derive from that, and the sheer conversion metrics and things like that will just be better, stronger coming from Instagram and Facebook right now. But TikTok is definitely worthwhile. I think it's fun.
Yeah, look, you got to go for where the volume is, and just to riff off of that a little bit, right? I mean, there's this concept that it's common among our team and what we do is this kind of a concept of share of wallet, right? Where are you taking your advertising or your marketing budget, and how are you allocating that towards efficiency, right? And I would just say that in the end, merchants really want to focus on the big three: Google and Microsoft, and Facebook and Instagram, and then begin to test the new and emerging channels for new opportunities to grow. But don't forget about these other things that could be happening in the background, like affiliate marketing and comparison shopping, all things that are all that have a different measure and a different value, and don't necessarily deal in like 1-to-1 ratios of click to conversion to sale to keeping a customer versus not keeping a customer. It's a whole different endeavor and experience overall.
Yeah, and I would say just focus on the metrics, right? We
Yep.
keep talking about it, we keep stressing
Data,
it. It's
data,
like
data.
you got to look at your data, you got to focus on your CPAs, you got to focus on everything, and you got to really understand your ROAS, right? So for those
Yes.
who don't know what ROAS is, it's your return on ad spend. I think it's super important for everybody to have a really deep understanding of their unit economics. And that's just what we should be focusing on. We did get another question. I think we have time for. We have 3 minutes left. So what is your process for finding audiences that convert well with your offer on new channels?
So with respect to us, right, and our platform and our team, we leverage Google Analytics very heavily. So we dive into key reports within Google Analytics and building reports off of that and bringing those over. So one of the great things, let's just, using Google as an example, is that you can link your Google Ads account with your Google Analytics account, and Google Analytics is going to automatically uh, pass these audiences over to Google Ads, which then you can begin to leverage for remarketing and display and other types of advertising activities. You do have to go into Google Analytics. You do have to go into the admin settings and build your audiences. Generally speaking, they're based on core principles. Abandoned carts, right? They filled their cart, but they never checked out. They checked out, but they went to checkout, but they never actually purchased, right? All of these things, if you know based on the behavior of a merchant, the URL structure of those particular parts of your website, and I know we're running out of time here, but I'll quickly finish up here. Is you can set those up in analytics and they pass over to Google. Similarly, this can be done in Microsoft Advertising with a Facebook or Instagram. You want, it's usually split up into 3 parts. It's your prospecting, right? And you kind of test these avenues. Prospecting is your overall audience, right? It's usually based on machine learning, but you can add in other things. Focus on like topics that are most relevant to your business and the consumers that would be most focused on buying your products. Lookalikes, you can actually build an audience on top of that prospecting audience. It's a percentage of those that are similar to, and then also your fallback winds up being remarketing, which is still a very hot, even after iOS 14 and a half, right? Still very, very strong revenue driver. Merchants in certain categories, like for auto parts, for example, still driving it over 20 times return on ad spend just for remarketing on Facebook alone.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, which means that you just have to get your stuff in order, right? Like retargeting pixels, all of the things that you need to set your back end up effectively to ensure that you can create these lookalike audiences and these retargeting audiences. Like that is super, super important. And I think those audiences that have been to your website, that have perused, that have done some window shopping, so to speak, I mean, that's a great way to find, you know, the audiences that are interested, but they're just not quite there yet. I think we are just about at time. This was awesome. Super fun to have you. Thank you so much, Tony.
Always fun with you, Elana.
We got to do it again.
Yes,
And next time, apparently, we're doing a cooking show. So if anybody is, you know, in the mood for some Tony cooking, I don't know what your specialty is. Why don't you tell us what your specialty is while we're at the tail end of this?
Good. So generally speaking, Italian is my specialty. I mean, it kind of goes with the territory, Tony. But I love. One thing I'm like, I was actually a pastry chef. So one of my favorite things to do is pastries, desserts, cakes. Because it's science. It's not really. It winds up not really being cooking. It becomes a science.
It's data.
It's really fun.
It's
Yes,
data.
it is
right?
data.
It's data
It is
science.
data.
You heard it here first, guys. We brought it full
Literally.
circle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Elana.
We really appreciate it. We really appreciate you as a partner at Clearco. So for everybody who's going into this crazy Black Friday, Cyber Monday season, if you have any other questions, please follow up with us in the chat and we will definitely reach out to you. And yeah, thank you so much, Tony. Really appreciate it.
Real pleasure. Can't wait for the next time.
Same.